Oh, my. It is Friday, January 26, 2004, and you've just joined us here, Season 8, Episode 4, everybody, here at the Pastors Roundtable. My illustrious co-host, Dr. Dion Henry, Pastor Roger Raid. Greetings, gentlemen, and happy Sabbath to you.
Happy Sabbath to each and every one of you.
It's good to see you guys.
Yes, good to see Pastor Wade. I know you've been busy doing your thing, man. I think you just got off a little vacation or something, man. So it's good to see you back.
It was a vacation, official vacation, but it was a great family reunion. We had a great time. Got in late last night. Today I was just worn out. But I got some energy from thinking about being on Pastor's Roundtable tonight, so I'm here.
All right. Hey, Miss McKenna's classroom is also here. Says Sabbath blessings, PRT, men of God, and all viewers. Bevan, I hope I pronounced that correctly. McKenna, watching from CT. I'm trying to go back to my third grade abbreviations. That's Connecticut. Yes, indeed.
Yeah,
all right.
Connecticut.
Good to have you joining us from Connecticut. For the rest of you that are joining us tonight, we want to know where you are from. Listen, if you're watching this live or even if you're watching on the replay, we still want you to drop in the chat where you are watching and joining us from. We want to make sure that we know who all of our audience is. And again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Listen, we've got a hot one tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, and we don't have as much time as we normally do. We've only got about an hour this evening before our guests have to leave us. And so we want to kind of jump into it as soon as we can. But before we do, Dr. Henry, there's something wait. Well, we'll talk about February. We'll save that till the end. Maybe we'll do that on the end.
Well, but that's right. Listen, we need to share this feed right now. Look, again, we have a short window tonight. But I'm telling you, the information that you'll get today will be transformative.
Crazy.
It'll make you aware of what's happening. And so please share, especially with your religious liberty director. Please share it. And I know that we'll be blessed with the topic that we're presenting tonight.
Listen, not only share it, you need to get somebody on right now. You need to tag somebody, share it in your feed, but then tag somebody's name, your pastor, your local church religious liberty director, your conference religious liberty, your union religious liberty director, your PARL team. Get them in on this because this is just going to be eye-opening, I believe, for so many of us tonight. I'm anxious to get in. I know we're waiting for one of our guests who's not quite in yet. I'm trying to stall a couple minutes so that he was on the road this evening, not quite home, so he's on his way getting there. Listen, I see camera graying, but I know who that is. Marie Campos from Hollywood, Florida. Sister Polo, good evening.
Right.
Happy Sabbath to let me put it up on the screen. There we
Hollywood
have.
is in the house. That's it.
Hollywood is in Florida, y'all. If y'all didn't know, it's in Florida, South Florida. We've got Karen Hitchens Black that is joining us this evening, watching from South Central Conference in Alabaster, Alabama. That's your neck of the woods, Raj.
That's my part of the country.
Yes, indeed. Hey, and then here's one of our faithful supporters. Miss McKenna, but I clicked the wrong button. I was wanting to. There he is, Andrew Brown from Berrien Springs, Michigan. God bless. He is a friend of the Roundtable and a cousin of mine. God bless you, Andrew. Always good to see you and the fam that's joining us there. All right.
Listen,
can we? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, by the way, listen. The Pastors Roundtable, we are again talking about some relevant resource and real topics. And next month, right? Next month, we are going to be dealing with Black history, several topics that kind of deal with Black history. And you just want to make sure that you get that information so that you can share those shows that are coming up, because I'm telling you, this is where it's at. The Pastors Roundtable. I was at a function on Sunday And we had a big function here in our conference, and there was one person that came up to me and said, "Hey, listen, keep on doing Pastors Roundtable. Do it,
Mm,
do it, do it. We're enjoying those topics." That's what they told me, and I know you've heard that as well. And so we're trying to
yeah.
keep it relevant, trying to keep it real. Next month is going to be a powerful month.
I want to
Yeah.
tell them what next week's topic is going to be. Can we breach that one?
Drop the
Oh.
hint. Drop the hint.
Here we
Well, I
go.
don't know.
Listen.
I don't know.
I know why you're
I
saying
don't
you
know
don't
for
know.
other reasons. Go ahead.
We have some guests still hanging in the balance, but I'm gonna throw it out there because I love the topic. Listen, next week, as you know, we're in February. It's our first week in February. It is Black History Month. We're going to be kicking off. We're going to be attempting to kick off Black History Month with the topic of the white church and Black history. Oh my. The white church and Black history. We're going to kind of dig into some stuff and within the confines or the context rather of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So I'm excited. I'm excited about having that topic. So you want to make sure that you bring somebody with you next week. All right, guys, I know our time is getting away from us. We're 11
Let's
minutes
go.
in. Are we ready?
Let's do it.
All right, what's
Let's
on
do
the
it.
table tonight, gentlemen? Roger, talk to us. What's on the table, man?
Well, listen, if you are living under a rock, if you're living behind God's back, you probably don't know what we are going to be talking about. But I believe from what I'm hearing, if you even live in the city, in the country, you probably don't know what we're talking about tonight. We are going to be talking about Project 2025.
Oh,
Project 2025. We'll hold the mystery a little bit when we start with our guest. But you want to hear this. This is going to be an interesting, something that's happening right in front of your face.
My goodness.
right
So
under
listen,
our noses. Listen,
watch this,
and-
Pastor Paul.
Uh-huh.
We heard the topic tonight, but you got to tell us who's at the table tonight, man, because
Oh,
we got
man.
two heavy hitters that are here at the table. Tell us who's at the table.
Listen. I wish I could read all of the accolades and all of the bio on these guys. We're going to have them share in just a little bit. I'm going to bring one of them on now, Pastor Gregory Hamilton. He is a religious liberty, can I say this? A religious liberty guru. Oh, there he is, Pastor Hamilton. Such an honor to have you back at the Pastors Roundtable. This is not your first time with us. You are a PRT alum. And so we're excited to have you with us again tonight. Oh, and our other guest just made it in tonight. We're going to bring him on as well. He is no stranger to the topic that we're talking about as well. Dr. Nicholas Miller. We had a stand-in picture, but now I got rid of him instead of his picture. We'll get him back here in just a second. But we are excited to have both of these gentlemen with us here. Pastor Gregory Hamilton has been the Pearl Director for, I got to get the Union right, Union out in the northwest of the country. He has had, I wish you could go to his Facebook page, and there's a great big huge bio that tells you all of the stuff that he's done. We're going to give him an opportunity in just a moment to share some of those things as soon as I can find out how to get Dr. Miller back.
Right.
Roger, you know these guys as well. Let me handle this tech right quick, and then you kind of give us a little bit more of this overview before we let our guest address our audience.
All right. I have to say for Pastor Hamilton, we had a very good interaction. We met while I was pastoring at the Bethel Seventh-day Adventist Church in Brooklyn. He came all the way from the North Pacific Union, and man, did he throw down a word for us there in Brooklyn. Doc Hamilton, thank you for joining us. Now he's retired, and he'll tell you a little bit what he's doing there in Colorado. Dr. Hamilton, and then we also have Dr. Miller, who is here with us right now, who just joined us, a professor of history and but also a lawyer. that has embarked on a special project. You'll hear a little bit about that later on. But we're so glad these two gentlemen are here with us. We're going to give you, as our host, our one of our hosts always does, he'll give you a few moments to just share a little bit about what you would like the audience to know about you. We did not read your bio left and right, but we want you to share with us what you would like our audience to hear and know about you. And we'll start with Pastor Hamilton.
Well, I pastored for nearly 10 years in the Nevada-Utah Conference out in the Wild Wild West, Elko, Winnemucca, right along Interstate 80, Reno, Truckee, Lake Tahoe area. So rootin' tootin', Wild Wild West out there, and enjoyed it very much. And then went to Baylor University and did my graduate work there and wrote 402-page thesis on Sandra Day O'Connor's Judicial Philosophy on the Role of Religion in Public Life, which is still an original work. And then I went to the North Pacific Union Conference where I got a call and worked there as the Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Director and President of the Northwest Religious Liberty Association, which we had a team of Capitol pastors or lobbyists and attorneys that worked with our office. And in those 23 years, I handled 4,103 cases of helping people with their Sabbaths in the workplace. So a lot of work, a lot of speaking around the country in the Northwest. And I did a lot of diplomatic shuttling back and forth between the Northwest and Romania in helping them to reform Article 19 of their Constitution and their anti-blasphemy laws. And in that Article 19, and also help them stop or prevent a 6-day work week law from going into effect at the Parliament, which would have been a Sunday law.
Wow.
So that was a lot of fun. I was commissioned by Dr. Beach and Nelu Burcha, who's now currently our United Nations liaison for the General Conference. And so I had a lot of fun doing that. And
Awesome.
Retired out here in Western Colorado, 25 miles from the Utah border. Nick came out to see us with his family. That was a lot of fun to have them out here. And we're out here in the Wild Wild West again, and we just love it. It's like everybody asks, well, why do you go out to the Wild Wild West where there's just a bunch of cowboys and dudes and that don't agree with you? And I said, well, then I wouldn't have a mission. Why do I want to go where everybody agrees with me? Right? So I got my work cut out for me here at the Hamilton Library and Constitution Center, which we built on our property here. And I'm having a lot of fun. I get quite a few people actually come by and wonder what this is. I had somebody come by today and we had a nice sit down and talk, and it was great. I mean, District 51 school district and the PR director wanted to know more about this place. And so they're all engaged. And also Colorado Mesa University, the political science department is very much interested in getting me involved.
Awesome.
So my main goal and mission, however, here at the library is to make it a non-lending library, so they would actually research whatever they wanted to in-house here without taking any books or archival material out, like journals or whatever. But then essentially my goal is to reach the Hispanic community and teach them their rights and their basic rights under the Constitution, which I have a real strong burden for. So anyway.
Okay. Sounds great. Excellent. Dr. Miller, share a little bit about you and what you would like our audience to know.
Yes. Well, it sounds like you have a couple of Westerners on your hands, because I was born in England, but I grew up in Southern California, studied theology at Pacific Union College, felt a calling from the Lord to get involved in the religious liberty work. And so I went to Columbia Law School, and I practiced law for 10 or 12 years, emphasizing constitutional law and church-state issues, and felt a further calling from the Lord to do more advanced study in church and state and the influence of Protestant theology on the formation of the American Constitution.
Wow.
And the Amendment, and I wrote a dissertation and then a book by Oxford University Press, The Religious Roots of the First Amendment. I taught church history for 17 years at the Adventist Seminary at Andrews University. And just in the last year or two, I've transferred over to Washington Adventist University, where I've helped raise some funds to sponsor students to be interns for the church on Capitol Hill.
Oh,
So
wow.
we have 6 students that are working with church leaders, Liberty Magazine, the Parle Department, and our own Edward Woods the third for supporting running conferences and doing research and basically lobbying on church, state, and religion issues in Washington. And in fact, in relation to tonight's meeting, so I'm now professor of law and religion at WAU. I'm still a research professor of church history at the seminary, but I'm overseeing these interns. And one of these interns and I, at the request of the Message magazine editor, did some research, and we've have a draft of an article on Project 2025, its meaning, what's behind it, its significance. And so I'm really looking forward to getting into a bit of a discussion here about that topic and about that project. So it's a pleasure to be with you tonight.
Wow, that's phenomenal. Listen, just before we go, Raj, and hop in, I am hearing a little feedback in the background. So if anybody has their speakers on their computer turned up kind of loud, I need you to turn them down just as much as you can, but so that you can still hear, or to pop in some headphones. Other than that, Raj, let's go. Let's get into it.
All right, let's have a word of prayer, and then we'll jump right in. Father, we thank you for tonight. We thank you for this opportunity. We pray, Father, that the topic will bring glory to your name. Direct us and guide us is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. All right, let's jump right in. First and foremost, we are dealing with what is the Project 2025. Share with us, Dr. Miller. You just pointed out that you have done some work on that. Share with us, what exactly is Project 2025?
Okay. Yeah, and this project has gotten some attention from Adventists because it talks about Sunday and Sabbath and Sunday laws. But we need to give the bigger context of the project. It's not mostly about that. And in fact, it's not something that has just happened here in the last year for 2025. What it is, it's a series of plans and proposals for the next president, right? That will start in 2025. And it's been prepared under the oversight of the Heritage Foundation, which is a leading conservative, right-wing, large, basically Republican think tank. But they haven't just done it themselves. They've called on a wide range of right-wing scholars and experts, probably 400 conservative scholars and policy experts. And it's not their first time doing this. This is part of a mandate for leadership that they have been doing since the Reagan administration.
Wow.
So we shouldn't overplay that, they're suddenly coming up with this new plan. The Heritage Foundation has been doing proposals for what should happen in the government ever since Ronald Reagan, which is back in the 1980s. So every time there's an election or a new president coming, they put down what they think a good conservative agenda should look like. And there's various parts to the program, including there's a policy and personnel database, there's training, and a 180-day playbook. But what we focused on is the policy agenda, and it's a big book. It's 800 pages.
Oh, wow.
And it consists of 30 chapters, taking the reins of government, the common defense, the general welfare, and the economy, independent regulatory agencies. And so it covers the waterfront of what they hope a conservative president would do when they get into office, from the Department of Defense to the Department of Commerce to the Department of Education. So I think it's fair to kind of set out the larger framework as to what this project does and is. They have four main goals or broad fronts that I think are worth mentioning, because we actually may agree with much of what's said here, right? And there's some things we're going to disagree with, but I think it's fair to say, where do we have common ground? So there's four kind of main broad fronts that they want to share with us. One is to restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and protect our children, right? That doesn't seem so bad. That seems like an important part of having a healthy society. Two, dismantle the administrative state and return self-governance to the American people. Now, that's a little more controversial. Like, what do they mean by that? And which departments are they going to get rid of? And so there's a lot that could be discussed there. But the third one is defend our nation's sovereignty, borders, and bounty against global threats. Well, I think we're all okay with having our borders defended and protected. And then number four, secure our God-given individual rights to live freely, what our Constitution calls the blessings of liberty. Well, at least at that level of abstraction, there are some things I think we could say those sound like some good plans. The question becomes, what are the details of these plans?
Okay.
Because often the devil lies in the details. And, especially this thing about dismantling the administrative state, I don't think they're talking about doing away with the Department of Defense, the Department of Justice probably. They're probably focused on the Department of Education and maybe the Department of Civil Rights. And so there's some areas that could concern us in some of those details. And we may want to get into some of that. But I wanted to just kind of give the broad overview of who's doing this, how long they've been doing it, and what are the broad areas they're looking at. And I'll shut up for a moment and let Greg step in if he wants to add to that or correct that or expand on that as he sees fit.
Greg, do you have anything to add to it?
Oh, yeah. There we go. Go ahead, Greg.
Okay, hi. Yeah. Well, I was reading a New York Times Magazine interview by Lulu Garcia Navarro with the president of the Heritage Foundation, Kevin Roberts. And he makes it very clear that his goal is to, that Project 2025 is to destroy the administrative state. And what they mean by that is what they call the deep state. And if you really examine it closely, the Heritage Foundation, first of all, is a public policy organization, and Project 2025 is a 920-page document. But it specifically really harkens back to the original history of the first compromise of the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln, when William Howard Taft was running for re-election for president in 1912, and his opponent was the Democrat Woodrow Wilson, and the Bull Moose Party or Progressive Party was headed up by Teddy Roosevelt, who was the president before William Howard Taft and who had served 2 terms before that with William Howard Taft as his vice president. And then Eugene Debs, the socialist, was running. So it was a 4-man race. And it was very interesting because William Howard Taft, in his stump speech at the Republican Convention in 1912, came up with this slogan that's been with the Republican Party for a number of years now. And it was the slogan of less government, more responsible government. And that line has gotten more and more radical over the years. And the reason why William Howard Taft said that statement was to basically try to win over Southern white former slave owners and those who didn't like the Reconstruction in the past, and basically say, hey, we're for states' rights and we want to reduce the federal government. It was a massive turn, a massive pivot for the Republican Party away from Lincoln's ideal of a strong central government, which Lincoln really loved Alexander Hamilton's ideas on that point, and believed that states, if left to themselves, would basically be the worst entity to uphold basic civil rights, human rights, women's rights, religious freedom, separation of church and state, you name it. And so he was right in that configuration and said that we needed a strong central government. That's why he called for a constitutional convention, along with James Madison. But Jefferson and Madison, they came up with what's called the Virginia-Kentucky resolutions, which became the actual wording of the Confederacy during the time of the Civil War. And basically, they put forward the doctrine of nullification. The Kentucky resolutions was a little bit more watered down, not as strong as Jefferson's, saying that states ought to be ultimately sovereign over the federal government. And so what you have here is you have this Heritage Foundation. Their whole basis, their whole foundation is the foundation of the lost cause. The lost cause being this idea, well, okay, so the South lost the Civil War, but it was all over states' rights, not slavery. And in fact, it was over slavery and state rights together. You cannot separate the two issues over that time, and you still can't separate them today. You see, the more you allow states to be ultimately sovereign over the federal government, okay, instead of semi-autonomous, they're semi-autonomous right now under the concept of federalism, okay, their goal, the Heritage Foundation's real goal, ultimate goal, is to do away with the Civil War amendments, the 13th Amendment, which is the Emancipation Proclamation Act, the 14th Amendment, which gives us our basic rights, okay, due process, et cetera, privileges and immunities, equal protection, et cetera. And then the Voting Rights Act, which is essentially giving blacks the right of citizenship and the right to vote. And so that was key. But you see, they don't like, and what that did during that time is it gave the federal government what's known as the Incorporation Clause, the right to regulate the states, which they hadn't had before, especially when it came to the first 8 Bill of Rights, which included our basic rights, religious freedom, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, et cetera. And so all of those things now became a regulatory force, which then grew the federal government and its agencies to basically regulate the states. And so the Heritage Foundation, their whole plan is basically to do away with the federal administrative state, not completely, like Dr. Miller said, but it also includes, it basically is a plan to allow the president, whoever they hope it's Donald Trump, to become an authoritarian dictator, basically to go after his enemies, use the Justice Department, not allowing the Justice Department to be independent, but turning it to be political, and then doing away, basically firing like something like, 100,000, 200,000 federal workers. There's like I think there's like 2,200,000 federal workers in these agencies, and the Heritage Foundation calls them unelected officials. And so therefore, they have no right, to tell us what to do and hinder a Republican presidency that wants to go rogue and allow the states to do whatever they want. One final thing. What Hamilton proved back in 1787 at the Constitutional Convention is if you allow states to go on their own and be autonomous, like it was during the Confederate period, and I don't mean the Civil War, but prior to the Constitutional Convention of 1787, you had trade wars, you had fisticuffs, even militias fighting each other from state to state, states fighting each other. It was state warfare and not the same currency, and so they needed a strong central government to regulate all that. Well, the southern states didn't like that because they knew they had strong plantations and slaves and so on, and so what's been proven is if you allow states to basically go on their own, they will not uphold rights like the federal government. So that was proven um, prior to the Civil War. Is there was no rights for slaves, there was no citizenship, there was no rights for women, essentially, and those were big things that needed to be corrected. And so we had what's called a second founding. There's a book here I have by Eric Foner, winner of a Pulitzer Prize for his book, The Second Founding, How the Civil War and Reconstruction Remade the Constitution. And it's fascinating because that's what they want to deny. They want to basically strip these rights, and they don't like same-sex marriage, which, hey, listen, that's a problem for us morally, obviously. But constitutionally, under the Equal Protection Clause, as Dwight Nelson has preached at Andrews University, at the Pioneer Memorial Church, we need to uphold our own standards as a church in terms of hiring practices in our institutions and hold to our moral standard. But when it comes to the state, you've got the 14th Amendment, you've got the Equal Protection Clause. So you've got same-sex marriage, you've got abortion rights, which has now been done away with. And what did the Supreme Court do in the Dobbs decision that outlawed abortion? They basically threw it to the states. You states, you duke it out. All right. So what does that do? That leaves everything into confusion. And as confusion and chaos reigns and gets more and more out of hand in this country by such thinking, what it does is it allows the states to kind of look up to, we need a savior. We need a president, with a unitary executive theory to basically do whatever he wants to get everybody under control. So they start to look for a savior. It's kind of like Satan, who gives people diseases and then pretends to be the healer. And that's really what's going on. It's a setup. This whole Project 2025 is a setup for an authoritarian dictatorship. And in the interview, Kevin Roberts with Lulu Garcia Navarro specifically says, this is on January 21, just this last Sunday, he says, yes, not only do we want the destruction of the federal administrative state, but we definitely want to prepare for a strong authoritarian dictator-like president, which they claim is what the founders wanted originally, which is nonsense.
Wow. Pastor, as you go through that, I'm thinking just in some layman terms, you've addressed a whole lot of what I'm getting ready to ask already. But when you talk about the origins of the Heritage Foundation, and you use terms like the lost cause, in my head, that triggers some racial overtones.
Very much.
And we're looking, and we're in the middle right now. We're in the middle of this Republican primary. We're getting ready to elect a new president. Elect a president, whether it's a new or a returning one, in the fall. What does this Project 25? How does this Project 25? How might it impact some of the election that's going on? Any of the racial issues that still always kind of seem right below the surface in American society, and then the play into we've often heard terms and we see things like what's the word I'm looking for, there's it's on the tip of my head, the religious Americanism. What are we calling that? There's a term that's very
Christian nationalism.
Christian nationalism. That's the word I'm looking for. Talk to us a little bit about how those things impact right now, and then Dr. Miller, we'd like to hear from you on that as well.
Sure. Well, Christian nationalism plays directly into this. I mean, Christian nationalism is really nothing new. It's become more and more manifest, and it's something that the evangelical community did not for a long time really readily accept. It's coming on full board. There's been some studies, scientific studies, that shows that they're starting to jump on this bandwagon of Christian nationalism in a very serious way. And when I say it's really nothing new in this sense, I mean, it's nothing more than Jerry Falwell and the Christian right aligning with conservative Catholics, who was encouraged by Paul Weyrich, who was the leading Catholic advocate for a Christian right motif, and along with Father Richard John Newhouse, the founder of First Things Magazine, which is an evangelical Catholic magazine or a conservative Catholic magazine, and they've advocated this very same thing. We have to return society to good morals. The founders intended our nation to be a Christian nation by law, which is really wrong and grossly wrong. In fact, the founders were utilitarians. The framers of the Constitution said that basically, the Constitution. I mean, people of faith, we recognize churches and religion, but they must be autonomous and they must not interfere with the federal government. Neither should the federal government interfere with the churches. Now, that doesn't mean individuals and Christians can have a voice. No, we have a right to stand up for what we believe. So they didn't say that. They just assumed that, religion would take care of itself, and the administrative state, via the Constitution, we the people, would be a secular government. And the people, the fundamentalists back in those days, even during the time of the Constitutional Convention, did not accept that. They were upset that God was not mentioned in the Constitution. And so it's a continuation of that type of thinking where they truly want to, it goes with David Barton, who started this whole stuff with Wall Builders Incorporated out of Texas, and who advocates this whole idea that the founders intended to have a Christian nation by law, and that it should be Christian. And that somehow we failed to, get it right. And then he basically argues that and he basically points to the founding as if the American founding, the true founding, was the Puritan founding, not the constitutional founding. Basically, it's right in Christian nationalism. What's Puritanism all over again?
That's fascinating. Listen, Dr. Miller, let's get you a chance to kind of weigh in on this part and see, as far as the impact of the right now in terms of this Project 25, some of the Christian nationalists. How do you see that from your perspective?
Well, I do think that we want to approach Project 2025 with a little bit of nuance and fairness. There was an article shared in the chat from The Guardian, and really it's a mashup of Donald Trump and some of his statements combined with Project 2025. And I think we need to make clear that Donald Trump is not in charge of Project 2025. It's an independent group. Maybe they have some overlapping interests and goals, but I don't think is it possible that the administrative state has grown too large and unresponsive and implementing rules in a less than democratic way? I think that's possible. On the other hand, there's a statement in Project 2025 that says woke propaganda is found throughout the administrative state, and this needs to be cut back on. And it's unequivocally kind of an enemy of religious freedom and other important freedoms. And I think that's to take it too far. I'm representing some religious colleges in defending the Title IX religious college exemption, which allows religious colleges to uphold their lifestyle, sexuality, and gender biblical perspectives, and still allow their students to have federal loans and grants. And that exemption is being challenged by an LGBT advocacy group to have it declared unconstitutional. And if that happened, that would do away with all of our students being able to access federal loans and grants, which would be crippling to our schools. Well,
Mhm.
we're representing these schools in federal court, but you know who's also on our side? The federal government itself is also defending this exemption. And if you listen to the critics of Project 2025 and the administrative state, you would think that the Biden administration and the executive agencies would only be on the side of wokeness, but it's not always true. And this case that I'm in demonstrates that. So I think we need to be careful about lumping everything Donald Trump says and represents with Project 2025. However, having said that, I do agree there is a concern on this Christian nationalism front. And maybe now I can move to this particular question regarding Sabbath and Sunday. There is a page or two, it's not a lengthy section, where the Project 2025 document talks about, and I should give you a page number here in case people want to look it up, where it talks about the fact, it almost talks fondly of the fact that that there used to be Sunday closing laws, and
Right.
it protected people's religious freedom in America. And they say that what should happen is that employers should be penalized for asking for employees that work on their Sabbath. And Sabbath is going to assume to be Sunday. But, and I think it's only fair to point this out, they say if the holy day of an employee is another day, like for Jews and Baptist, Seventh-day Baptists and Adventists on Saturday, then they should be given time and a half to work on Saturday. Now, so it's, there's an attempt to be a little bit even-handed here, but on the other hand, it also suggests that these holy days shouldn't so much be protected as the businesses can buy out people's religious convictions by just paying them more to work on their holy days,
Wow.
which isn't exactly the way we would like to think about it, right? That it's not about earning more money, it's about having our consciences protected. So it's not an advocacy for Sunday laws. It is an advocacy for allowing employees to have either a Sabbath or a Sunday off, or for employers to be penalized by higher rates of employment. But it may have the perverse effect. If people are going to be paid more on Saturday or Sunday, maybe more people will want to work on Saturday or Sunday. I think for me, I'm less worried about
money. There's going to be more tithe money. If I work more, get paid more, I can return more tithe. Yeah.
I think the thing that concerns me is not so much the proposal as it is the language that's used in almost fondness for how Sunday used to be protected, and that Sunday laws were a good thing, and this is maybe a small step in returning that direction. And it's that rhetoric that is reflective of a Christian nationalism, and also to penalize employers based on religious teachings and standards somehow seems to be an alarming precedent. And so this is something that's obviously of interest to Adventists. A friend of mine who works in the Parle department in church leadership, we're trying to have conversations. We have some conversations with the Project 2025 people and those who wrote this section.
Oh, wow.
To share some of our concerns. We don't want to just attack them as being all misguided and wrong-headed, but we feel that as fellow Christians, brothers, that we should be able to come and say, look, are you really thinking carefully about these matters of conscience and how you're handling them? Here's what we may suggest differently. So you may pray for us as we explore this conversation
Wow.
with them.
Fascinating. Yeah,
Yeah,
Greg was
I have a quick,
chomping
I
at the bits
have a
there.
quick question here.
Hold
Yeah, I have a
on,
quick
Doc
question.
Henry. Pastor
Oh,
Hamilton was.
Hamilton.
I
Oh, yeah,
only
I'm sorry.
got,
Go, yeah,
I
sorry.
He's
only
been.
got a few minutes left here because I got to leave. But I want to ask Nick a question. It's on page 589 of the Project 2025 document. Bettina Krause, our Liberty Magazine editor, wrote an article in the current issue, February 2024, on this, and she focuses in on this, and I think it's it's well written. She says the section begins by saying God ordained the Sabbath, which she inserts Sunday in brackets, as a day of rest, and until very recently, the Judeo-Christian tradition sought to honor that mandate by moral and legal regulation of work on that day. And then she writes, this is followed by a few sentences on why a regular day off is beneficial. And then the proposal, quote unquote, that she quotes here in the document, Congress should encourage communal rest by amending the Fair Labor Standards Act to require that workers be paid time and a half for hours worked on Sabbath, which Nick has already covered. But my question to Nick is, you're saying this doesn't necessarily favor Sunday keepers. It favors all people of faith, or would that exclude minorities like Muslims or others? I mean, you're saying that it doesn't, that it's not a Sunday law per se, but it seems to me that there's a hint of clear discrimination here, potentially for, I mean, what guarantee is there that they won't favor Sunday Christians versus Muslims, Jews, Adventists, Hindus, Sikhs, whatever? I think there's no guarantee here, and I think this is broad and very dangerous. It's a rhetorical question, but I throw it back at you.
Well, yeah, it's a real question, but I have read this section, and they do specifically say that there will be time and a half for work on Sunday, except for those workers that observe another day, another holy day of worship. And so for Jews and Saturday, seventh day Sabbath keepers, it would be time and a half for those days. Now, I don't think Muslims are forbidden from working on Friday. That's their day for prayers. So I think making it applicable to either Saturday or Sunday, depending on the conviction of the worker, would at least be an equal treatment, right? It's not putting Sunday over Saturday. It's making allowance for whatever the worker's conviction is.
But still, I mean, you and I have argued all the time. In fact, when we argue to employers that, most of the time, Sunday keepers, the employer will say, "Hey, well, what about my Sunday keeping employees?" And my argument is, well, and you've probably made this argument, and maybe you didn't, but I'm assuming you did, is that, Sunday keepers some of them don't often take their Sunday Sabbath as seriously as people of minority religions. And so therefore, to me, it's an inherent problem within the document itself, regardless of their wording. It just seems like a facade. It seems like it's not genuine. That's just the way I view it. Maybe I'm not being fair here, but maybe I'm reading too much into it. But based upon our experiences, it definitely doesn't favor those of minority religions, in my opinion. And Bettina Krause says that. She states that right in her article, that is her concern, and I agree with her.
Well, but it specifically mentions Saturday keepers, and it makes the same allowance and the same rule for them. Saturday keepers are in the minority, so they do make an effort to treat the minority and majority in a similar fashion. I don't know how else to say it other than that.
Okay. Wow. This conversation is great. It's relevant. And just talking about Project 2025. Now, here's my question for you. Yeah, I think we talked a little bit how it could possibly impact, or how it can impact the lives of the believers here. But I want to ask this question. Could you elaborate on the Heritage Foundation's significant achievements dealing with the projects that they've had in the last 2 decades? So I know that we went back in the past and we talked about some of the philosophies that were being initiated. But again, just talking about the Heritage Foundation, there's significant achievements over the past 2 decades. And how do these accomplishments reflect the current situation and influence at hand? Just to see if their proposals has made a significant difference in the last 2 decades, because there's always there's Project 2020 and there's always these projects. Can you just elaborate on that, Pastor Miller, Dr. Miller?
I
Yes,
have
go ahead.
I have to run, and so I'm going to turn everything over to Dr. Miller. So thank you so much for having me on. But I've got a praise team practice that I'm already half an hour late for. So at our church.
You don't want to on this question, Greg, before you go, just have a stab at this question.
Yeah.
I don't know how to answer that question, to be honest with you.
Well, yeah, okay. It's good to see you, Greg. If you have to run off, give our regards to Laura and have a wonderful Sabbath.
Thank you so much, Pastor Hamilton.
All
right. Blessings to you.
Yeah.
Take care, Pastor.
All right. And Dr. Miller, I'm just going to reset this scene for a quick second here. Give me just a second, and I'm going to swap this out so that we have you right here. There we go. And then I'm going to change your name underneath. But go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So the question was about the Heritage Foundation and its influence. And
right. In the last two, so the influence of the Heritage Foundation, the different projects that they've had over the last 2 decades, what significant influence that they have, and how do those that kind of govern the potential impact of 2025, their Project 2025?
So, the Heritage Foundation has had significant influence in conservative politics over the last 2 to 3 decades. There's no question about it. And I think that a lot of the criticism in the mainstream media and the press is in fact due to a certain amount of unhappiness and almost jealousy in the influence and impact that the Heritage Foundation has had. Now, I don't agree with the Heritage Foundation on everything, but neither do I disagree with them on everything. A lot of what they say about religious freedom in their documents, I agree with. I think there is a contest in our country. It talks about in our chat, has been suggested that there is a wokeness extreme in our country that has pressed for agendas regarding sexuality and gender and LGBT issues that is concerning and is a threat to our institutions. And the Heritage Foundation proposes that these things be, that religious freedom be protected in this context. And I'm in favor of that. And I'm in federal court to see that that happens. And a lot of the mainstream media criticizes the Heritage Foundation because they want to see LGBT and left-wing values overcome religious freedom and the freedom of religious institutions. I do think that the Heritage Foundation is probably not as influential as it sometimes claims to be or wants to be seen to be. It did have an outline and a course of events the first time around, and it claims that something like, I think I had that in my article, I can't remember, but that something like 60% of its agenda proposals were carried out
by the Trump administration.
Trump administration. And I haven't read through the details of that first proposal, but a lot of think tanks want to claim that its proposals are being put into policy, and there's often a certain amount of exaggeration that takes place. But there are think tanks on the left-wing side of things that put out proposals every year as to how a left-wing Democratic government should run things, right? So we can't say the Heritage Foundation is being inappropriate because it's wanting to set out a conservative policy and political agenda. A lot of the criticism is because it is influential and frankly, the left-wing think tanks have not been as influential as some of these right-wing think tanks. But I think that another organization that probably has been even more influential, at least in the legal world, have you heard of the Federalist Society? The Federalist Society is a right-wing legal organization and think tank. And it has probably, when Donald Trump was president, he chose judges that were identified by the Federalist Society. And the change in the judiciary, and especially in the Supreme Court, was largely due to the efforts and organization and strategy of the Federalist Society, which probably had more influence, at least on directly legal matters, than the Heritage Foundation. But, to kind of sum up, yes, the Heritage Foundation is probably the most important right-wing think tank, conservative think tank that exists. It's had tremendous influence over the last couple of decades, and we can believe that what they've set out here, not all of it's going to get implemented. A lot of it would take changing laws and getting things past the Congress and getting maybe even changes to the Constitution through the Supreme Court. But certainly some of it will, and it will be influential. And there certainly are concerns about religious nationalism and the weakening of the Department of Justice, of the FBI, of some of the important organs of government that stand in the way of a more powerful, centralized authority in the president. And you can see that the way that Donald Trump campaigns and speaks, he wants to be able to do things unilaterally and with little to no resistance from other organs of government. And certainly what Project 2025 is doing would coincide, overlap, complement, make those kinds of plans perhaps more easily carried out. So it is a genuine concern. We can't trumpet that Sunday laws are being called for because it doesn't say that. But it does show, in my mind, an excessive interest in Sunday laws that have historically happened. And I think we have to watch very closely and have conversations with our friends on the Christian right and at the Heritage Foundation about why we have the convictions we have about conscience, about Sabbath keeping, and about an appropriate separation of church and state. Yeah. So I'm not sure if I exactly answered your question, but it's covered the waterfront.
Right.
I'm
Dr.
Henry,
Miller. One minute. You brought up a very interesting point, and as a member of the Seventh Adventist Church, as a member in the pew, what you're sharing is not new, based on the foundation that Pastor Hamilton and yourself laid out in it. This information is out there. Why is it such a shock to us as members in the pew? What it is that we are not doing to be aware of what's happening, especially like with this Project 2025?
Well, I mean, this is a relatively new proposal. Liberty Magazine has had an article on it that's educational and thoughtful. Message Magazine, we've got one in the works there, and we're having this conversation tonight. So some things are happening, but I do think that we live in such a time of such polarization that we're in our little silos. So tonight, this group we're largely criticizing Project 2025 and Christian nationalism, but I can tell you that a couple of weeks ago, there was another Adventist religious liberty group, and they were having a conversation like this, but they were talking about the dangers of wokeness and the left wing and LGBT and how Christian, that we needed to return to Christian values. And so, and in some ways, I think maybe you can pick up that I'm trying to be a little bit more nuanced here.
Sure.
That in some ways, the extreme characterizations of both sides encourage the other side to even greater mischaracterizations or unfair characterizations. And I think that we need to come to a place where we can say, yes, there's some things in this Project 2025 that concern us, but there's some things we can agree with too. Is it possible for us as Christians to see the fair concerns that they raise about an overreach of the administrative state, about left-wing LGBT issues threatening our institutions, but then can we have conversations where we think maybe you're going too far in this area and you're not being sufficiently sensitive to the dangers of Christian nationalism? Can we have a dialogue and discussion with them? Has this conversation today, if people who are part of the Heritage Foundation heard this conversation we've had today, would they be completely turned off and unable to engage with us? Or would they say, yeah, they're trying to be fair. Maybe we can have a dialogue and conversation with these people, even if we have some different points of view. And I think that's what I'm calling for, is let's stop burning down the ground on the other side of the fence and demonizing it. And that goes both ways. Both sides have the tendency to do that. And can we try to build some bridges and engage in some substantive and ultimately, hopefully, productive and fruitful conversations?
Well, it's fascinating, Dr. Henry. I wanted to just read directly from their page, the Project 2025's website, on their front page, on their first page. To your initial question there, Dr. Henry, they say that most recently, the Trump administration relied heavily on Heritage's mandate for policy guidance, embracing nearly 2/3 of Heritage's proposals within just 1 year in office. So I'm not sure, to your question, how much ultimately they're saying in the first year. It was, as Dr. Miller cited, that 66% is really what they're saying. But through the rest of the 3 years of the term, were there any more? It doesn't really address that specifically. It just says what they embraced. It's their claim of what they embraced within the first year. And then, Dr. Miller, I would push back just a tad to suggest that, to say that there is no Sunday law proposed in Project 2025, if they are proposed now, that depends on, in our context within Seventh-day Adventism, in our heads, we have kind of scripted what we think Sunday law means, right? That means a prohibition of worship on Saturday and a command or a force to worship on Sunday. However, if we just take it at face value, if there is a Sunday law, if they are proposing that a wage increase, time and a half, be a law that is mandated on a day of worship such as Sunday, then I would push back and say there is mention of a Sunday law. It might not be what we typically understand to be a Sunday law in terms of forcible worship or prohibition of worship, but it is, at face value, at its core, a Sunday law if they are proposing that there be a law instituted to encourage people not to work on Sunday by instituting this wage increase as a law. And I think that's what people are afraid of, and it kind of opens the door. It's that little scary door that's open to bigger and greater things. Would you agree with that assessment, or how would you?
Yeah, I mean that's so if we define Sunday law a little differently than the way we usually think about it, you could make an argument that certainly this is a law that has to do with Sunday, and it has to do with Saturday and possibly Friday.
And I think, Elder, let me just put this as well. And we assume that the motive is not political but religious. And that's the crux of the issue there, that the motive for doing it is a religious motive.
Well, yeah, but we also have Title VII, which requires employers to make religious accommodation for the convictions of individuals.
Good point.
And so, in a sense, that's a Sunday law too. It's a Saturday law. It's a law that allows people to be protected in their religious practices, and it has a religious motivation to protect the religion of people. So I'm not. I agree with your characterization, but I'm not so sure that we would always be against that
It's
kind
any
of
different
thing.
than what we've got. Got it.
But I do think ultimately you make a valid point, because Title VII protects the individual conscience, and the substance of that conscience is provided by the individual. But here in Project 2025, the law itself contains a provision about a day that the government has decided is a holy day, right?
Sure.
And it's allowing other people to choose a different day. And this is ultimately a critique that I made in the article, that it sets a bad precedent for the government to create a penalty that's based on a religious belief that the government itself identifies and prioritizes. It's not creating a penalty for any other religious practice. If you need to wear your turban at work and it's not going to be accommodated, it doesn't say you have to pay that person time and a half to wear their turban, right? The government has identified a day of worship.
Wow.
And so I do agree that this sets a bad precedent for creating a civil penalty based on a religious infraction that the government itself identifies.
Wow.
Wow. Okay.
Stuff.
Okay. Wow. Listen,
So I've kind of argued both sides of this now.
Yes, but it's helpful. I think it's yeah.
I think I agree with you.
Yeah. I was just going to mention one thing. I know, Raj, you were going to say something, but so what makes Project 2025 different from the other initiatives that the Heritage Foundation or the conservative group has? And I'm assuming that it is the mentioning now of the Sunday law. Am I right? Or are there some other significant differences from the other, pillars that they have held strong for so many years?
Well, that's a great question. And I'll confess to you, I haven't read all 885 pages of this document, right? I've read the summaries of it and descriptions about it, and I haven't read the other documents. But what my sense is, it's come to Adventist interest because of its reference to Sunday and Sunday laws. And the others didn't. This seems to be new. If it had happened before, I'm sure we would know about it, because we're that obsessive kind of people that whenever this is mentioned, we're all over it. And I do think the context is different. In other words, they have a candidate who's more willing to do revolutionary and destructive and extreme things, right? He is somebody who would get rid of administrative agencies at the stroke of a pen, the consequences, notwithstanding. And so I think there's a sense that maybe Trump can win again. And if he does, boy, we have an ambitious plan that, he will help implement, because he's like a bull in a china shop, right? He's willing to just break stuff that other people would be less willing to do so. So I think those two things, the reference to the Sabbath and this context of a leader who, by his own words and admissions, is just kind of willing to break tradition, break precedent, and do new and unusual things. So I think that's what's going on.
I also want to. I think we need to at least acknowledge what you just shared in terms of the fact that our antenna goes up when we talk about Sunday law and the Sabbath, and when it comes to government, and we also deal with, and you pointed out the separation of church and state in the way we deal with stuff. But what are the implications as a church, a prophecy church like what Seventh-day Adventists are? What is the implication to the Project 2025 and the prophecies that we have been purporting over the years?
Well, I think that's a great question. And, as Adventists, being a public affairs and religious liberty leader in the church, especially on the non-regional, the majority side of the church that aren't so concerned about social justice issues, right? I'm in this group. I like this group especially because we see the Sabbath as being part of a tapestry of civil rights and social justice, and we speak about other things as well. But for the mainstream part of the church, not saying we're not mainstream here in a variety of ways, but they've tended to focus almost exclusively. The only public moral issue that many Adventists seem to care about is Sunday and Sunday laws. And so they looked kind of obsessively at that, and they've made up rumors, and there's been books written that really are based on false information about Sunday laws pending in Congress and about to be submitted. And really, it's been very quiet for the most part on the Sunday law front. There really hasn't been much talk in the religious right about this. And this is significant, I think, because you have the leading right-wing conservative think tank that is very influential, and suddenly we find this being discussed. Not in a overt, we have to pass Sunday sacredness laws and everyone must worship on Sunday, but we can't overlook the fact that there is a positive reference to Sunday laws, and it's almost like the worst things that exist on this topic are in the preamble, not actually in the policy that's proposed. But Greg did quote, and it's worth saying again, that God ordained the Sabbath as a day of rest. And until very recently, the Judeo-Christian tradition sought to honor that mandate by moral and legal regulation of work on that day. Now, that's a favorable statement about that, right? It's like those were the good old days when the Judeo-Christian tradition sought to honor by moral and legal, make America great again by returning to
America was great, sure.
And then it talks about a shared day off makes it possible for families and communities to enjoy time off together rather than as atomized individuals, and provides a healthier cadence of life for everyone. Now, the scary thing is, I mean, shouldn't we actually agree with that statement? Shouldn't we want people to have the ability to take a day off over the weekend? Shouldn't we want people to have the ability not to work 7 days a week? I mean, we kind of should want that. The communal day of rest has eroded under the pressures of consumerism and secularism, especially for low-income workers. Right? That's true. Consumerism and secularism has been dangerous. And in our haste to protect Sabbath and prevent Sunday laws, we sometimes, I think, miss this critique that it has been problematic to turn to a 7-day, 24-hour work week where everyone, especially poorer people, are almost compelled to work all the time. My kids are out of college now, but it's been remarkable as they're seeking to get jobs, how difficult it is to get a job, at least at the lower level, entry level, where there doesn't have to be weekend work of some kind. You know, is that the way we should be as a society? So again, maybe I'm urging us to see the other side of this story, not because I support Sunday laws, but if we're not aware of the strength of the argument that they're making, we're not going to be able to effectively respond to it. Okay. And I think we need to look for ways that we can help people have days of rest and not be forced to work 7 days a week, but to do so in a way which protects religious freedom and doesn't have the government involved in promoting a particular day of worship.
Yeah, I think, often when we talk about, Doc, we talk about this topic of Sunday laws, et cetera, and particularly as Adventists, as many are looking at this particular issue, the Project 2025. As I have browsed the internet and I have watched different perspectives that are in support of the project, there is language that is more explicit than I have ever heard in the past, saying, pushing further than what the document may actually say in print, where there is much support from the proponent or the supporters of Project 25 coming out and saying things much more explicitly. Like, yes, we wish we could impose a law that forces people to worship on Sunday. And I think that a lot of our Adventist folk who are seeing this, they're not reading the document, they're not seeing the actual text, but they're seeing what proponents of the text are suggesting and are saying very openly in a way that we have not seen before. And so that's why I think that that alarm level is perhaps a little higher now, even though documents like this may have existed, in perpetuity going back. And I think that that's probably one of the things that has heightened the level or introspection, not introspection, but of looking at this thing differently than we have in the past. I've got another question though. In the context of Adventist prophecy, this kind of goes on what Roger was asking. We've heard a lot in the chat today about wokeness. Very hard to define that, I think. I'm not quite sure. Whenever I see somebody say woke, I'm not really sure exactly what they mean. But if I'm just taking a stab at it, I'm looking at things like the LGBTQTI agenda. I'm looking at socialism. I'm looking at atheism, everything that people associate with the left or the far left.
Far left, yeah.
And so whether it's Antifa or anything that is associated way over there, and I see that oftentimes in the church there is, and in that mainstream church that you talked about, there is a very vocal backlash to that. Black Lives Matter, that's associated with wokeness. And so when we look at Adventist eschatology, should the church where does the church find more concern? Is it on the ultra left, or is there more concern in our perspective of prophecy to the ultra right? Where does the level of our concern based on prophecy, where does that land as we look at both of those sides?
Well, yeah, I think I see where you're headed, and I do tend to agree with you, but I would note, and I think it's a very important part of our prophetic outlook, is that we have teaching regarding the King of the North and the King of the South.
Okay.
And the King of the North represents a kind of Christian absolutism that we saw in the medieval church, and will rear its head again in the time of the end. But the King of the South, representing Egypt, representing a Pharaoh who knew not God, representing a secularism and an atheism, at least as to the true God, the principles that we see in the French Revolution, and then the principles that we may see in this extreme wokeism that you're talking about, they're involved in a conflict, and where that conflict surrounds us. And we can't afford to get caught up in either army on either side. Now, where I think you may be headed is, in the end, and this involves a study of Daniel 11 and 12, it's the King of the North whose principles of absolutism and religious fundamentalism overcome and take over the King of the South. And in some ways, I saw in the chat, there's a suggestion that both work together, but certainly the King of the North is the party that is indicated as in control. So it is a religious extremism that is the ultimate orchestrator, if you will, of final events of false worship. But, on the other hand, we can't forget that it's often the extremism of the King of the South that gives the King of the North his power, And if we're caught up and silent as to the problems on the King of the South, then we help actually strengthen the King of the North by this failure to see that there are problems over there and that we can't find common cause with that extreme either. Wow. So I think the prophetic outlook gives us this middle ground where we can most effectively point out the extremes on both sides.
Wow.
Good. So, so let me just, because I want to make sure that our audience who may not be as familiar with the terms and the prophetic imagery of King of the North and King of the South. So if we're saying, when we look at Adventist eschatology or biblical eschatology, and we talk about the imposition and the force of Sunday laws or Sunday worship or just forcing worship at all, the idea that a secular, atheistic, or agnostic power would turn around and impose religious worship, the logic of that just does not mesh. It does not meet. And so Adventists having a fear of the left more so than of the right just seems to be imbalanced based on the prophetic understanding of Bible eschatology. And what you're suggesting is that, I think a very balanced way, is that the reason that the religious powers gain so much power is because there is such a push from the secular, atheistic, just kind of a worldly, immoral society that pushes people on one side to say, hey, in order to combat this, we must coalesce and impose religious beliefs and religious worship in such a way that will appease. And then we read in Ellen White's writings all of the natural catastrophes and warfare, that these things will appease this angry God if we worship him and make everybody else worship him the way that we think he ought to be worshiped.
Yes, very well stated.
All right. Well,
there was a lot of feedback when you were talking, Pastor Paul. I'm not too sure what that was, but I know that the time is running now.
Yes.
So So Dr. Miller, wow, we appreciate you coming on and giving us an overview of Project 2025, the history, some of the implications, and also being mindful that we got to look at this thing with with eyes, knowing that there are some things that this agenda is pushing, we need to be concerned about, but we also need to be concerned about the other side as well. So just that balanced view, I think, is what you gave us here tonight, which is exceptional. It's good. Thank you so much for coming on. We got to have you come on again. I like that prophecy, talking about prophecy, man. And I want to talk about Daniel chapter 7, man. I want to talk about some of these things here too that are looming around Adventism. They have some big debates and discussions on that now too. So definitely would love to pick your brain on that as well.
Sure. Praise the Lord.
Other than Dr. Miller, other than the project2025.org, where we find about that, where are some other resources if other people would like to kind of catch up on? Where can we go to get those resources?
Well, Pastor Hamilton has already mentioned Liberty Magazine. I think you can find that article on the Liberty Magazine website that talks about Project 2025. And hopefully soon in Message Magazine, there'll be an article on that, the one we're working on to get out to the people there. So awesome. Those are the good places at this point.
All right.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Again, Doc, thank you so much. We also want to thank, in his absence, Pastor Greg Hamilton for joining us tonight. We thank you, our audience, for taking the time to join us tonight. If you have not checked in and told us where you're watching from, we want you to do that because we want to know where you have joined us from tonight, and we thank you so much for doing it. We also, Pastor Roger, want to encourage the folk, if they want to find out more about the Pastors Roundtable and check out some of the previous editions or episodes of the Pastors Roundtable, where can they go?
Well, listen, if you enjoyed tonight and you're interested in finding out other topics, please stop by our website, theprt.live, and you will have not just recent episodes, you will have every episode that we have had an opportunity to share in a conversation on the website. And at the bottom of the website page, you are welcome to join and support. If you enjoyed what you had tonight, you want to support Pastors Roundtable. We want to be doing some projects, some other things, and it takes money to make things happen. And seeing that we are self what's
funded.
The word I want to use?
Funded.
So join us to be a part, self-supported. Join us and be a part of how we keep this ministry moving forward again.
All right. Well, listen, again, thank you, everybody. We want you to make sure that you join us on next week. Next week, we begin the month of February. We're looking at Black history all month long in the month of February. We are tackling a topic. We're in an attempt to tackle a topic on next week, the white church and Black history. It's going to be very, very fascinating, very interesting as we look at that topic on next week. Bring somebody, come along, share this stream, share it if you're watching it even live, if you're watching it on the replay, make sure somebody sees it. Again, a very special thank you to Dr. Miller and to Pastor Hamilton for joining us tonight. Dr. Miller, I want you to know we've been wanting to have you with us for a long time. I think as far back as season 2 or 3, your name was all up in our production meeting saying we've got to get Dr. Miller on Pastors Roundtable. We are happy and delighted and honored that we were finally able to make it happen tonight, and we'd love to see you back again. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. All right, Raj.
Awesome. Well,
Yes,
listen. To our viewers who have joined us tonight and those in the replay, our regular viewers, our new viewers, thank you for joining us where we strive to make ministry relevant,
resourced,
and real. God bless.